She was dragged out of her Arlington home in nothing but her underwear, her children watching in horror as their mother screamed, powerless to stop the man they had once trusted. Hours later, he returned alone, calmly dressing the children, packing their bags, and driving them to school as though nothing had happened. His lie was simple, chilling. "Your mama's at your grandmother's." But the children knew better. They had seen the truth. 3 days later, on December 5th, 2024, a landscaper cutting grass in Fort Worth stumbled upon a body dumped in a field owned by the city's water department. Partially clothed, shot multiple times, abandoned like discarded trash. It was 2-year-old Tataria Shante McGuire, mother of 4, woman of faith, daughter, fighter. The man who was supposed to love her, who played family man on social media, was the very one who killed her. Let's rewind. Before the headlines, before the horror, who was Tataria, and how did love turn so fatally dangerous? Before her name was plastered across news outlets and crime reports, Tataria Shante McGuire was simply known as a mother, a daughter, a friend. At 32, she was raising 4 children, 3 boisterous boys who filled her home with sneakers, sports, and laughter, and a little girl she called the cherry on top of her motherhood journey. She lived in Arlington, Texas, a city that blended suburban calm with the undercurrents of danger that women like her often navigated quietly. To outsiders, she was just another young mother making it work. To those who knew her, she embodied resilience. Nothing had been handed to her. She worked. She struggled. She overcame. Every obstacle became an opportunity to grow, to heal, and most of all, to create stability for her children. Her mornings often began with phone calls to her mother, Patrice. They weren't just chats, they were lifelines. Patrice wasn't only her parent, she was her confidant and anchor, the person who steadied her through heartbreak, exhaustion, and hope. Their relationship was woven into the fabric of her daily life, which is why, when one of those calls went unanswered, Patrice's world began to unravel. Tataria's journey with love had not been easy. Years before, she posted on Facebook about ending an on-and-off relationship that had lasted half a decade. She confessed to nights of tears, to praying for answers, to feeling broken by her desire to hold a family together. And then she wrote words that revealed her resilience. God said move. And as much as I love him, I'm choosing me and my babies. She promised no man would ever again drag her so low, and for a time, it seemed she was right. She focused on her children. She found her rhythm again. She worked, leaned into her faith, and poured herself into the chaos of being a boy mom. When her daughter came along, the picture felt complete. Then came Lear and Dwan Tilly. Tall, smooth-talking, confident, he seemed like the answer to prayers she had whispered for years. He stepped into her life and played the role of family man to perfection. Taco Tuesday dinners captured on TikTok, where kids laughed and stirred pots. Daddy-daughter dances where he held her little girl's hand as if he had been there since birth. On social media, they looked picture perfect. To friends scrolling through their feeds, they looked like a happy blended family. But behind the curated posts was another reality. Family members noticed the cracks first: his temper, his controlling behavior, the subtle signs that safety and love couldn't coexist in the same house. They warned her, tried to tell her that what she saw as redemption was really danger. But Tataria, the eternal optimist, believed in change. She believed her love could fix him. She believed patience could soothe his anger, that commitment could outweigh his pride. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. The man who smiled for TikTok and family selfies became someone else entirely. His words cut, designed to shrink her, not build her up. His temper flared, leaving bruises on her spirit, and eventually, bruises on her body. The children saw it all. They heard the slammed doors, the shouts, their mother's cries. It was a cycle familiar to too many. Violence, apology, flowers, promises. For a while, she clung to hope. But in her final weeks, Tataria wasn't trying to fix him anymore. She was preparing to leave. And for a man like Tilly, rejection wasn't just unbearable, it was a threat to his control. By late November 2024, everything looked fine from the outside. She celebrated her birthday with him, posed for photos, posted thanks for holding her together. To outsiders, it looked like love, but inside, Tataria had already made her decision. She wanted peace. She wanted out. And that choice, that moment of reclaiming her life, is often the most dangerous for women trapped in cycles of abuse. December 2nd, 2024. Night falls on her Arlington home. The house that should have been her sanctuary became the stage for her abduction. Her children, those 4 young souls, were witnesses. They saw their mother dragged from the house by Tilly, wearing nothing but her underwear. They saw her struggle, heard her fear, cried out but could do nothing. Hours later, he returned alone. Calm. He brushed off their questions, dressed them for school, lied smoothly. "She's with your grandmother." But children know truth when they see it. They had watched her leave. They had watched her disappear. By morning, when Patrice's phone didn't ring, when the silence stretched too long, she knew something was terribly wrong. And within days, the search for Tataria would end not with a rescue, but with the grim discovery of her body in a Fort Worth field, shot, partially clothed, discarded, and her children, the ones she fought to protect, had become witnesses to the crime that ended her life. It leaves us with the first chilling question of this story. How does love transform into terror? And why does leaving often become the deadliest choice a woman can make? There's so much more to uncover: the investigation, the children's voices that shattered his lies, and the overwhelming evidence that exposed Tilly for who he really was. If you want to hear the rest, don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next will leave you questioning how many warnings we ignore until it's too late. On the surface, Learendwan Tilly seemed like the answer to everything Tataria had prayed for. He was tall, confident, smooth-talking. He had a way of making people feel as though he had life figured out. To her friends and family scrolling through social media, he looked like stability, like the second chance she deserved. His feeds told a story of family life. Taco Tuesdays in the kitchen, the kids laughing as he stirred pots like a doting stepfather. Videos of him at daddy-daughter dances, holding the little girl's hand as if she had been his from birth. Posts about buying a car with Tataria, smiling wide in photos as if he was investing in a shared future. To outsiders, it looked like devotion, commitment, a man building a life with the woman he loved. And Tataria wanted to believe it. After heartbreak, after struggle, after years of shouldering motherhood largely on her own, she wanted to believe she had finally found someone willing to step in and love her children, and build a home together. But behind that curated image was a storm. Those closest to her noticed the cracks first: his temper, his need to control, the way arguments escalated, not just into words, but into threats. They warned her, gently at first, then more urgently. This man isn't who he pretends to be. But Tataria was a believer in faith, in love, in the possibility that broken men could be healed if someone just stood by them. She thought her patience could soften him. She thought her love could fix him, but love alone can't stop a storm. Behind closed doors, the mask slipped. The smooth-talking family man became someone else entirely. His words turned into weapons, sharp and calculated to cut her down. He belittled her, chipped away at her confidence, reminded her of his control. And when words weren't enough, the violence escalated. Doors slammed, voices rose. Bruises appeared. The children saw it all. They weren't just bystanders to their mother's life, they were witnesses to her suffering. They heard the shouting through the walls, saw her pain, lived with the fear that every day might be the one when the yelling turned into something worse. Publicly, Tilly knew how to cover the cracks. He smoothed things over with flowers, with gestures, with carefully staged social media moments. He played the role of attentive partner so convincingly that even some friends questioned their instincts. But the cycle always repeated: abuse, apology, flowers, promises. Then back to violence. Tataria tried to make it work longer than she should have. She wanted stability for her children, wanted to believe in the family image they were projecting. But by the fall of 2024, the cracks had widened into chasms. She was tired. Tired of the bruises, the insults, the fear. Tired of lying to cover for him. Tired of trying to hold together a home where love was a facade and terror lurked beneath. Friends noticed her withdrawing. She seemed quieter, more guarded. At times, she would talk about leaving, not dramatically, but with a kind of quiet determination. She wanted something different for her children. She wanted peace. Even in those final weeks, she still tried to celebrate him. When he got his license to drive industrial trucks, she applauded him on Facebook, writing, "Baby, the price just went up." It was part love, part hope. The hope that maybe success would change him, that accomplishment would soften his violence. But deep down, something in her had shifted. She wasn't trying to fix him anymore. She was preparing to walk away, and that is the most dangerous moment in abusive relationships. Statistics confirm it. The time a woman decides to leave is when she is most at risk of being killed. For Tataria, it was no different. By late November, things still looked picture perfect from the outside. She celebrated her birthday with dinner, laughter, photos that painted the image of a happy couple. On social media, she posted thanks to Tilly for holding her together. To friends scrolling by, it looked like love, but appearances deceive. Behind those smiles, the fault lines had grown too wide. Tataria was no longer clinging to hope. She was planning her exit. The children felt the tension in the air. They had lived the cycle of love and violence long enough to recognize when things were coming to a breaking point. They watched their mother pull further away from the man who terrified them. They hoped for change, but they also braced for what might come. And for Tilly, the thought of losing her was intolerable. His ego couldn't handle rejection. His pride wouldn't allow accountability. He carried a gun with him always, a symbol of the control he thought he had over everyone around him. And as Tataria's resolve to leave grew stronger, so too did the danger. By the start of December 2024, Tataria was standing on the threshold of freedom. She was done believing in his apologies, done accepting his violence as the cost of love, done sacrificing her peace for his ego. She was ready to walk away. But for a man like Tilly, that decision wasn't just unacceptable, it was a threat. And he was ready to respond the only way he knew how: with violence. The night of December 2nd would reveal just how far he was willing to go. And what happened inside that Arlington home would scar 4 children forever, because love hadn't fixed him, and leaving him would cost her everything. The sequel takes us to that night, the 2nd of December 2024, when Tataria's children watched in horror as their mother was dragged from their home, and the gruesome hours before her body was found. Don't forget to subscribe, because the sequel will reveal the moment this family's nightmare became a reality. December 2nd, 2024. The night Tataria Shantae Maguire's fight for peace came to its violent end. Her Arlington home, the place she had tried so hard to make into a sanctuary, became the stage for horror. Inside were her 4 children, the ones she had lived and sacrificed for, the ones she had promised to protect. But that night, they became witnesses to a truth no child should ever see. It began with an argument. The details may never be fully known, but the children heard the shouting, saw the rage, and then, suddenly, they watched as their mother was dragged from the house by Lear and Tilly. Not fully dressed, not ready for the world outside. She was pulled from her own home wearing only her underwear, stripped of her dignity, stripped of her safety, stripped of her freedom, in front of the children who loved her most. They cried, begged, pleaded. But Tilly was unmoved. He took her, and he was gone. Hours passed, dawn broke, and then the front door opened again. The children froze, waiting for their mother to return. But she didn't. It was Tilly who came back calm, collected, as if nothing had happened. He moved through the house with chilling normalcy. He dressed the kids. He prepared them for school. He brushed off their questions with a cold lie. Your mama's with your grandmother, but children know truth when they see it. They knew their mother hadn't left willingly. They knew she hadn't just walked away. They had seen her taken. And now, she was gone. That morning, the silence was deafening for Patrice, Tataria's mother. Every day, without fail, she spoke with her daughter. Morning calls were their ritual, their anchor. On December 3rd, the phone never rang. Patrice tried calling, again and again. No answer. As the hours ticked by, unease turned into panic. She knew her daughter would never vanish, not willingly, not with 4 children who depended on her. By the evening of December 3rd, the family reported her missing. Arlington police were dispatched for a welfare check. They found no sign of her. Only worry etched into the faces of those who loved her. Patrice took to Facebook, desperate for answers. She posted, "This is my oldest daughter, and she is missing. I need your help. She has been missing since Monday. Any information, please contact Arlington Police Department." Behind the words was a mother's plea, her intuition screaming what her heart already knew. Something terrible had happened. The children carried the truth. When investigators questioned them, their courage pierced through Tilly's carefully constructed lies. They told police what they had seen, how their mother was dragged from the house by Tilly, how he carried a gun, how he left with her that night and returned without her. Their voices cracked open his alibi before it even had time to harden. Meanwhile, Tilly told police he hadn't seen her since dropping her off in Irving. He claimed he'd gone to his father's house in Dallas. He spoke with the confidence of a man who thought he could talk his way out of anything, just as he had smoothed things over so many times before. But lies can only stand so long against truth. Investigators pieced together surveillance footage. Cameras captured his Chevrolet Tahoe, traveling not toward Irving, but toward Fort Worth. They tracked his movements to a remote field owned by the city's water department, a place far from homes, far from lights, far from help, a place meant for disposal, not love. For 2 days, the family clung to hope. Patrice prayed aloud on social media, begging God for her daughter's safe return, for protection, for one more morning call. The community shared flyers, spread her face across timelines, searched for signs. But the silence deepened, and hope became harder to hold. December 5th, 2024. A landscaper, cutting grass along Greenbelt Road, stumbled across something that would end the search. Lying partially clothed in the dirt was the body of a young woman. She had been shot multiple times, her life taken with brutal finality. Nearby, investigators found a receipt dated December 2nd from a cell phone repair shop, a small slip of paper that confirmed what the family already feared. The victim was Tataria Shante McGuire. Forensic investigators worked quickly. Surveillance showed Tilly's Tahoe pulling into that field just after midnight on December 3rd, the very night he dragged her from her home. Minutes later, the vehicle drove away. He had dumped her body there, abandoning her in the cold dirt like she was nothing. The mask was gone. His claims of dropping her off, his lies about Dallas, all of it unraveled under the weight of evidence. The children had told the truth. The cameras had told the truth. The dirt had told the truth. On December 6th, 2024, police arrested Liren Tilly. He was charged with murder. His bail was set at $250,000, a number that felt insultingly small when weighed against the life he had stolen, the trauma he had inflicted, and the 4 children left motherless. When news reached Patrice, the grief was unbearable. She had known deep down since that first unanswered call, but confirmation is a cruel blade. Her firstborn, her daily companion, her anchor gone, and for the children, the nightmare only deepened. They had lived through their mother's final moments. They had watched her terror. They had seen her disappear. And now, they had to grow up without her. The home once filled with sneakers and laughter was now heavy with silence. Every corner echoed with what had been stolen. Every morning that began without her voice was another reminder of loss. But in the quiet devastation, a bigger truth emerged. Tataria's story wasn't just about one woman's death. It was about the deadly cycle of intimate partner violence, about the danger that rises when a woman finally decides to leave, about the children who carry scars invisible to most. And it forces us to ask, how many women live like Tataria did, smiling through photos, hiding bruises, convincing themselves that love can fix what violence keeps breaking, because for her, that hope cost her life. The sequel takes us deeper into the investigation and the legal system, how the evidence stacked up against Tilly, how the community grieved, and why Tataria's murder wasn't just a single tragedy, but part of a much more devastating chain of events. Subscribe so you don't miss the sequel, where we ask, how do you prevent love from becoming a death sentence? The morning of December 5th, 2024 began like any other for a city landscaper tasked with cutting grass along Greenbelt Road in Fort Worth. But within minutes, his life and the lives of an entire grieving family would be changed forever. Lying in the weeds of a field owned by the city's water department, he spotted what no one should ever have to see. The body of a young woman. She was partially clothed, her skin pale against the dirt, her life violently extinguished. She had been shot multiple times. Forensic teams swarmed the scene, combing the area for clues. Among the debris, investigators found a receipt dated December 2nd from a cell phone repair shop, a small slip of paper, almost unremarkable on its own, but devastating when tied to everything else. It was proof. It was the thread that stitched her body back to her last known movements. The woman was identified quickly. She was 2-year-old Tataria Shante McGuire, mother of 4, daughter, fighter, the woman whose family had been begging for answers for days. The news crushed her loved ones. Patrice, her mother, had prayed, posted, and pleaded for her daughter's safe return. That hope shattered instantly. She would never leave her children, Patrice said. Never. Ever. Ever. And she was right. Tataria hadn't left. She had been taken. The evidence began stacking against Lear and Tilly faster than even investigators anticipated. Surveillance footage revealed his Chevrolet Tahoe driving into that very field just after midnight on December 3rd, the night Tataria disappeared. Minutes later, it pulled out again, lighter by one soul. Tataria's children had already told police what they saw. Their mother dragged from the house in nothing but her underwear. Tilly gone with her, then returning without her. His story about dropping her off in Irving collapsed immediately under their testimony and the cold, unblinking eyes of surveillance cameras. There was no mistaking what had happened. On December 6, 2024, police arrested Tilly. He was charged with murder. His bail was set at $250,000. To many, that number felt insultingly small, as if dollars could measure the magnitude of his crime, as if money could balance the scales of 4 children left without their mother. But for her family, the arrest was not relief. It was a grim confirmation of what they already knew. Justice had begun, but the heart of their family was gone. The grief was immediate and consuming. 4 children robbed of their mother, a grandmother forced into the role of caregiver and grief-bearer at the same time, a home once alive with chaos now quiet, heavy with absence. Her friends flooded social media with tributes. They remembered her smile, her determination, her faith. They shared stories of how she overcame every obstacle with grace, how she loved deeply, how she raised her children with joy. They remembered her as a woman who deserved peace, who deserved safety, who deserved life. But her death was more than personal tragedy. It was part of a devastating pattern. Statistics show that thousands of women are killed every year by intimate partners. And research reveals a chilling truth. The most dangerous time is when a woman decides to leave. That moment of reclaiming freedom, of choosing herself and her children, often triggers the deadliest violence. Tataria's story fits that pattern with heartbreaking precision. She was preparing to walk away. He chose to silence her instead. For Black women, the statistics are even more alarming. Advocates call it what it is: Black femicide, the disproportionate rate at which Black women are murdered by men they know, men they once loved, men who promised to protect them. Tataria's murder is not an anomaly. It is part of an epidemic too often ignored, too often excused, too often brushed aside as domestic disputes. But there was nothing minor about what happened in Arlington that night. 4 children watched their mother dragged away. 3 days later, she was found dumped in a field, shot multiple times. That is not a dispute. That is execution. On social media, voices rose in outrage. One post captured the heartbreak and the lesson: love doesn't fix broken men. Predators disguised as partners deserve swift and absolute justice. And that's the contradiction that makes stories like this so difficult and so necessary to tell. Tilly presented himself as a loving partner, a family man. He played his part on TikTok and Facebook, posed for photos, made people believe he was devoted. But behind closed doors, he was a predator. A man who controlled, who terrorized, who killed. When his mask slipped completely, Tataria paid the price. Her murder forces us to look at the uncomfortable truth. How many warning signs do we ignore? How many women post smiling photos while hiding bruises? How many children learn to live with fear as part of their daily routine? And how many times do we let predators like Tilly fool us with apologies and performances until it's too late? The case against him was strong from the start. Surveillance, receipts, testimony, forensics. The legal system would now grind forward, weighing evidence, preparing for trial. In Texas, where Tataria lived and died, the punishment could be severe life in prison, even the death penalty. Some already whispered it would be fitting for a man who betrayed his role as partner and father figure so completely. But for her family, no sentence could restore what he stole. No courtroom outcome could give 4 children their mother back. Justice in the legal sense is slow, methodical, deliberate. But the deeper justice, Tataria deserved a world where she was safe, where leaving didn't mean dying, remains elusive. Her story is not defined by the violence that ended her life, but by the love that filled it. She was a devoted mother, a woman of faith, a fighter who never stopped trying to build joy for her children. But her death demands more than memories. It demands recognition, action, change. Because if we reduce Tataria's story to a single tragedy, we risk missing the warning it carries. The next part of this story takes us into the aftermath. How Tataria's family grieved. How her mother Patrice stepped in to raise the children. And how this single case connects to the wider call for reform and protection. Don't miss the next part, where grief turns into survival, and survival demands change. When the news broke on December 5, 2024, that the body found in a Fort Worth field was indeed Tataria Shante McGuire, her family's worst fears became reality. Hope, fragile as it was, dissolved into grief. The woman who had been a mother, a daughter, a friend, was gone. For her mother, Patrice, the devastation was indescribable. The silence of December 3rd had already spoken volumes. The missing morning phone call that was usually their ritual had told her something was wrong. But confirmation was a different kind of cruelty. She had lost her firstborn, her confidant, her anchor. She is like a breath of fresh air, Patrice later said. She's my firstborn. To have her and love her was like, oh my goodness. Her words carried both love and anguish. The dual weight of gratitude for who her daughter was, and despair for what had been stolen. Now, Patrice had to do the unthinkable. Explain to 4 children why their mother was never coming home. The boys, old enough to understand, carried memories too heavy for their years. They had seen their mother dragged from their home. They had seen her fear. They had watched her disappear. No matter what adults told them, they already knew the truth. The youngest, her daughter, was too little to grasp the full scope of loss. But she would grow up in its shadow. Every milestone, every birthday, every graduation would be marked by absence. For Patrice, the burden doubled. She wasn't just a grieving mother, she became a caretaker once again. At a time when she should have been leaning on her daughter for strength, she now had to summon every ounce of her own to protect her grandchildren. "Those babies need me," she said, "and I have to do everything in my power to keep them protected. And I will." The McGuire home, once alive with sneakers scattered across the floor, laughter echoing down hallways, and the sweet chaos of raising 4 children, now sat in quiet grief. Every corner carried memory, every silence carried absence. Tataria's friends, unable to process the brutality of her death, flooded social media with tributes. They posted photos of her smiling, videos of her children, messages remembering her resilience. Some remembered the way she leaned into her faith, always believing God would see her through. Others remembered her humor, her warmth, her determination to turn obstacles into opportunities. One friend wrote, "She wasn't just a boy mom. She was a warrior mom. She gave everything she had for those kids. And the world is darker without her." But beyond remembrance, grief demanded action. Community members gathered to hold vigils, candles flickering against the December cold. They spoke her name aloud, refusing to let her story fade into another statistic. For many, her murder hit too close to home. It wasn't just about Tataria. It was about the cycle of intimate partner violence, the pattern of women silenced by men who once claimed to love them. It was about the fear carried by so many, the knowledge that leaving often becomes the most dangerous act of all. Statistics reveal that women are at the highest risk of being killed when they attempt to leave abusive partners. Advocates know this. Survivors know this. And now, Tataria's family knew it in the harshest way possible. Her murder was also a devastating reminder of Black femicide, the disproportionate rate at which Black women are killed by men they know. Advocates across Texas and beyond began invoking her name in conversations about reform, about resources, about prevention. But while the community debated change, Patrice was living the daily reality of loss. She still had to wake up each morning and care for her grandchildren. She still had to plan her daughter's funeral. She still had to find strength when her own heart felt shattered. The funeral was packed with mourners, every seat filled. People came dressed in colors that reflected her vibrant personality. Photos cycled on screens, her smiling with her children, laughing with friends, radiating life. The service was full of stories of her generosity, her faith, her resilience, but the casket stayed closed. The violence had been too severe for a final goodbye. For the children, the funeral marked not just the loss of their mother, but the loss of the life they had known. Their innocence had been broken, their childhood forever shaped by trauma. Every day moving forward would be a balancing act of healing wounds invisible to most. And through it all, Patrice vowed to raise them with love, with protection, with the lessons her daughter had left behind. She refused to let them forget who their mother was. She refused to let her story be reduced to headlines. But the grief was relentless. There were moments when the pain felt unbearable, when the weight of responsibility pressed down so hard it was difficult to breathe. And yet, she kept going, because that's what mothers do. Even when their own hearts are broken, they keep going for the children left behind. For the community, Tataria's death became both a wound and a warning. Churches, advocacy groups, and women's shelters invoked her name, calling for greater protection, stricter laws, and better resources for women trying to leave abusive relationships. But for Patrice and the children, those calls for change couldn't erase the silence in their home. They couldn't replace the morning phone calls, the laughter, the chaos, the love that had been ripped away. And so, grief became their new normal. Survival became their new mission. But in that survival, one question loomed larger than all others. How do you carry on when the person you loved most, the one who should have been safe, was taken so violently by the man who claimed to love her? The next part of this story looks beyond grief, into the court system, the charges against Tilly, and the fight for justice. Because while her family struggles with the daily reality of loss, the legal battle begins. Will it be enough? Don't miss the next part, where we confront the limits of justice and the lasting legacy of Tataria's life and death. When police arrested Larendwan Tilly on December 6, 2024, they weren't just detaining a suspect. They were unmasking a man who had lived a double life. For years, he had played the part of loving partner, stepfather figure, family man. But in reality, he was a predator hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment control slipped from his grasp. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed his Chevrolet Tahoe in the exact field where Tataria's body was found. Her children had testified to seeing him drag their mother from the house that night. Forensics confirmed she had been shot multiple times. A receipt tied her last movements directly to him. His lies about Irving and Dallas collapsed under the weight of truth. Prosecutors wasted no time. Tilly was charged with murder, and though his bail was set at $250,000, the community seethed at the number. How could dollars measure the worth of 4 children left without their mother? How could freedom even be a possibility for a man who had committed such brutality? As the legal system began its slow, grinding process, the McGuire family faced a different kind of trial, one of daily survival. Patrice, grieving her firstborn, now carried the responsibility of raising her grandchildren. Each day was a balancing act, shielding them from trauma while keeping Tataria's memory alive. She told them stories, reminded them of their mother's love, tried to stitch together something whole from lives torn apart. But grief lingered everywhere. At night, the children dreamed of the night their mother was dragged away. At school, they carried questions teachers couldn't answer. And at home, every empty chair, every missing laugh, was a reminder of the void Tilly had created. For Tataria's friends and community, the grief turned to anger and then to action. Vigils turned into rallies. Posts turned into petitions. Conversations turned into calls for reform. Her death was no longer just one family's tragedy. It became part of a larger fight. Because Tataria's murder wasn't an isolated case, it was part of a national crisis. Intimate partner violence. Each year, thousands of women in the United States are killed by men they know. And statistics reveal a cruel truth. The moment a woman decides to leave is when she is most at risk of being killed. Tataria's story fit this pattern with chilling precision. And for Black women, the numbers are even more devastating. Advocates call it Black femicide. The disproportionate rate at which Black women are murdered by men who once claimed to love them. Tataria's case was not unique. It was part of a system that has failed women of color again and again. In court, prosecutors prepared for a fight. Texas is one of the harshest states when it comes to punishment for murder. Life in prison was almost certain. The death penalty was already being whispered as a possibility. Some said it would be fitting, the ultimate justice for a man who had betrayed every role he pretended to play. But for Patrice and her grandchildren, no sentence could undo the loss. No years behind bars, no needle, no execution date could bring back the woman they loved. Legal justice moves slowly, methodically, but emotional justice, the kind that heals, often never comes. And that is the brutal truth about cases like this. Courtrooms can punish, but they cannot restore. They cannot replace morning phone calls. They cannot mend children's broken innocence. They cannot give back the future. Tataria dreamed of a calm home, stability for her children, joy that wasn't fleeting. Still, the trial will matter, because it will speak her truth aloud. It will hold Tilly accountable, not just as an individual, but as a symbol of a larger crisis. And it will give her family the chance, however small, to look him in the eye and remind him of what he destroyed. Beyond the courtroom, Tataria's legacy is already taking shape. Her name is spoken at vigils, her story shared by advocates demanding better resources for women leaving abusive partners. Churches, shelters, and community groups cite her case when pushing for reform. Social media spreads her face and her story, ensuring she is remembered not as a victim, but as a woman of faith, a devoted mother, and a fighter who deserved more. Her murder leaves us with questions that linger long after the headlines fade. How do we protect women at the exact moment they're most vulnerable, when they try to leave? How do we ensure children aren't left as silent witnesses to their mother's last moments? How do we hold systems accountable when they fail to see the red flags, when they dismiss abuse until it turns deadly? And perhaps the hardest question of all, how many more names will join hers before we decide enough is enough? For Patrice, survival means raising her grandchildren with love, protecting them as fiercely as Tataria once did. For the community, survival means turning grief into change, refusing to let her death be in vain. For the rest of us, survival means listening to stories like hers and acting before tragedy repeats itself. Because Tataria's life should not be remembered only by the way it ended. It should be remembered for the love she gave, the strength she embodied, the children she adored, and the resilience she carried through every hardship. She was not discarded in a field. She was not defined by the violence that ended her life. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who deserved peace. And if her story teaches us anything, it's this: love cannot fix broken men.